The following is a production of UNO Television for KYNE TV. Consider This with Carol Schrader is made possible with support from Allegiant Health and by Nebraskans for Public Television. Consider This with Carol Schrader, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello. Consider this a real he said, she said story. And we're not talking about President Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. We're talking about the people arguing over your phone bills. We're going to talk about the legislative initiative, or the People's Initiative, I should say, 414 today. With me is Joanne Robinson. She's with Vote Yes for Lower Phone Bills, the official name of the committee.
That's
you
right.
have to have an official name. And also with us today is Phil Young, who came all the way up from Lincoln. He's with Nebraskans to Protect Our Phone Service. I want to welcome you both here today. We'll just start with the folks that got it on the ballot first. Joanne, we have heard so much, but if you can give us the maybe a little more than the 30-second commercial, which is a little more fancy schmancy. We'll get down to
the 30-second soundbite isn't quite enough to do this issue justice, because it is a very serious issue and quite complex. What we're talking about is the access charge, and that's essentially a user's fee that your local phone company charges to your long-distance company for the right to use their equipment to connect a long-state call for you.
Understanding that there's a lot of local phone companies.
Absolutely.
Big and small,
there are
in Nebraska.
about 42 local telephone companies operating in Nebraska. Every one of them charges this access fee, regardless of who your long-distance company is, who your local company is. Each of those phone companies levies this access charge on your long-distance company.
Sort of like a toll on a toll road.
Yeah.
So people can sort of get the idea.
Yeah, someone actually used the analogy the other day. It's kind of like a toll you're actually paying when you get on the on-ramp, and then you're paying your long-distance carrier to drive along that road, and then you're paying to use the off-ramp as well. So it's actually two additional charges that are built into your long-distance call.
All right, so the top, this won't be a David Letterman thing, but let's say the top 3 reasons real quickly, and then we'll flesh them out. That you believe people should vote for this 414?
Because by everyone's admission, including the local telephone companies, access charges are too high. The statewide average in Nebraska is nearly 16 cents a minute, even though it only costs the phone company about 2 cents a minute to provide the service. Nebraskans pay the highest access charges of all telephone customers in the United States. We are being overcharged a total of $65 million a year. That's being drained out of the Nebraska economy and put into the pockets of the local telephone companies, who don't have to demonstrate that they need this subsidy in order to continue providing affordable service. And those are kind of the top 3 reasons, because it's the highest in the country, it's costing us $65 million a year, and because the phone companies don't have to prove that this is a necessary evil.
Phil?
Well, we obviously disagree with most of the things that she just said, except for when she described what an access charge is.
You get brownie points for that.
There are 3 main reasons to vote against Initiative 414. First one being that if 414 passes, the only guarantee in that is that local phone bills are going to go up, and they're probably going to go up very, very significantly. It may differ in certain areas of the state, but it doesn't make a difference, rural or urban, local phone bills are going to go up. Secondly, $65 million that currently is used through access charges by local telephone companies to provide 10,000 miles of buried fiber optic cable in Nebraska, to hook up every school through the internet, for distance learning programs that are used by the university and several other groups, and also to make local phone service affordable. That money's going to be gone, and it's going to have to be replaced, which is why your local phone bill is going to go up. The third reason to be against this is because we do contend, and we just don't see it in there because the words just don't add up, that there's no guarantee in this initiative that once access charges are reduced, that you're going to see that residential customers will see any reduction in their long-distance bill.
That's a big point I want to get to, but let's go first to some of the numbers and crunch some of them without driving people insane. Because they, especially when they can't sit there and digest something and look at it, it's a little difficult. Let's take these 16 cents.
16 cents a minute.
All right, now what is that?
That is the actual statewide average that we are paying for access alone. Now, that's not the cost of the long-distance call. Keep in mind that we're talking about
So the
intrastate calls only.
Okay,
This is
so
within
the
Nebraska.
Access charge is, you're saying, is an average of 16 cents a minute, tacked on.
To the cost of your long-distance call. So a long-distance call in Nebraska, say from Omaha to Scottsbluff, if it costs my long-distance carrier 10 cents a minute to provide that phone call to me, I have to add on about 9 cents a minute for US West on this end, and probably about the same amount, if not a little more, to Sprint to connect the call in Scottsbluff. So that dime a minute call is going to end up costing me 20-30 cents a minute.
So are we paying that extra 16 cents per minute, roughly?
Depending on where you are and depending which company is charging the access charge. There are only 3 companies affected by this initiative, and all of them charge in the 7.5 cents range or lower a minute for access charge. They have several rural exchanges, but the access charge that they charge throughout those is about 7.5 or lower. Where you get into the higher access charges is in the smaller companies that have incredibly rural exchanges for the most part, maybe a few hundred lines. They charge in the teens of cents, up to
It's not
I don't
making
know,
sense.
18 or 19 cents a minute in some cases. That's where the average gets inflated. But Initiative 414, the 3 companies it affects, the 15.7 cents. You start at 14, then it went up to 15.7, and the number keeps kind of floating around and changing that the supporters keep using. We don't know what it is. We can't show that it's 15.7 cents because the information they use is internal AT&T documentation, and AT&T only has about 55% of the long distance business in Nebraska, so there's 45% of the long distance calls out there that are being made, and we don't know, what the cost of those is, because I guess the 15.7 cents is a company average, so they're comparing a company like a US West to a sod town.
Okay, well, hold that thought while I mention that we have a fly in here, and this fly is going back and forth trying to make up its mind on 414. So you may see our guests saying, this is a working student center, and the doors open and close quite a bit. All right, so then can we agree that there is an access charge and that it can be somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 cents,
low to mid-teens.
low to
usually.
mid-teens on
Sure.
kind of an average?
Total.
You might,
Throughout
Total.
Nebraska, it varies from 7 cents to as much as 30 cents, depending on the local service
all right,
provider.
okay, so we've agreed on that. Now the issue that I ask is that Initiative 414, as I understand it, would only affect 3 phone companies, so it might not even affect some of those, and correct me if I'm wrong, some of the smaller companies that, because of their per capita costs or
That's
per line
true,
costs.
and
so it
actually-
wouldn't even affect some of those.
This legislation, any legislation that we were to pass that dealt with rate regulation would only apply to the big 3 companies, US West, Alliant, and GTE. There is a state law on the books now, independent of our initiative, that prohibits the state from regulating the rates of companies that have fewer than 50,000 subscribers. So this legislation, as much as we would like to see access rates be reduced across the State Public Service Commission only has the authority to regulate the rates of the big 3 phone companies,
which are?
which are US West, Alliant, and GTE.
So, all right, so some of the examples or phone bills that people have looked at and they see these high teens charges, they may still be paying some of those.
The
Maybe not on the front
confusing
end.
part of that, no, the confusing part of that is that you don't see this charge on your phone bill. First of all, it's built into your long distance rate. This is a hidden subsidy. You don't know you're paying it because your long distance company collects it from you and gives it to the local phone companies. So what this legislation is going to require is that the local phone company will charge the long distance company a lower amount. Let's say that it came out to 3 cents a minute as opposed to 7, or in US West case 20 cents a minute. So let's say that we were able to reduce that to 3 cents a minute. Then that 5, 6, 7 cent a minute savings that the long distance phone company realizes has to be turned over to the customer in the form of a lower long distance rate. So even if your phone company does not reduce its access charges. If you are a customer of Sprint local phone company or Hamilton Communications in Aurora, your telephone company will not reduce its access rates, but your long distance company will reduce its long distance rates in order to spread those savings across the state. So you don't have to be in one of the 3 affected service areas to benefit from this legislation, because the savings are going to be realized in lower long distance bills.
And the problem with that is that there's no requirement that the actual user, in other words, if you're at home and you make a long distance call, there's not a requirement that you specifically receive that reduction. Because the language in this, they use a phrase called average prices in the aggregate, which means all the money saved from access charges goes into this big pie, and they can pick and choose who gets the reduction. And that's the problem. That's why there's no guarantee.
You're shaking your head.
That's simply not
true. I think this is a big deal to people. I mean, if they're going to vote for it, and if they're going to sort of come through for one another, is Aunt Maud and Grandma and me promised a cent for cent, dollar for dollar reduction.
Yes, and what we would like people to do is to read the sentence that Phil is beginning, because at the end of it, it concludes with a phrase applicable to such services. And that means that the long-distance rates that will be reduced are those that incur the access charge. Those are long-distance calls that go through the switched network. Big businesses don't generally use the switched network. They go point to point where they buy discount services. So businesses are not going to be, as our opposition claims, selected as the beneficiaries of these savings here. Anybody who places a call through the switched network is going to see a lower long distance rate. And some small businesses, home-based businesses, do use the switched network. Every residential customer uses the switched network. So every residential customer can expect to see a lower long distance rate. Now, we use AT&T AT&T has been our corporate sponsor since the beginning of this campaign, and we use a lot of their figures, and they give us an example that if we are able to reduce the access rates of the big 3 companies down to cost, the statewide average for access charges becomes about 7 cents a minute. They can start providing telephone long distance service for about 9 cents a minute. So a 3-minute call that now costs you $1.05 would cost you about 27 cents. And that is the kind of savings that is guaranteed not only by a commitment of the long distance phone companies who recognize the authority of this law, but by the law itself. The language of the law does specifically require that be passed on to the customers in that form.
Let me just ask one quick question before I give you lots of time to answer it. Wait a minute, if you say it could be reduced to 9 cents a minute, AT&T?
The actual total cost of the phone call, including the access charge.
Well, some people are paying 10 cents a minute anyway.
But they're also paying a $5 a month surcharge on that, and by AT&T's own admission, they're losing money on those customers. And there is some concern, even among AT&T, about how long they're going to be able to continue providing special discount rates as long as they're being forced to continue absorbing the access charges. They are losing money on those customers.
And
we can protect that discounted rate for those customers and ensure they keep getting that discounted rate. Because they're smart enough to pick the right calling plan.
Well, and also, part of it here is because AT&T...
That's why I hate long-distance phone companies. I don't know what the right calling plan is.
Because AT&T can pick and choose who they give discounts to right now. They can offer a dime-a-minute plan to some customers, and they don't have to offer it to another customer, okay? And which is what's going to happen after this is passed. They can offer a dime-a-minute plan to some people and not to other people. Everybody's not going to receive that kind of a reduction. They're just not. Part of the language that Joanne quoted at the end of the sentence that I started, where she says, "for such long-distance services."
Could you start that sentence again?
Well, it's a long one written by a bunch of really good lawyers for AT&T, and it's difficult to follow all the way through.
It says that it requires the long-distance companies reduce their charges
average prices in the aggregate.
The average prices in the aggregate be reduced to reflect the reduction in access charges applicable to such services.
To such, which is one of those words that doesn't say all such services, doesn't say every service, it says such. And if we're going to watch a President of the United States argue about what the definition of the word is in his testimony on TV, if you don't think that the lawyers for AT&T are going to have a field day saying, oh, well, we're giving back this money, to people, And who's to show? They don't have to open up their books to the Public Service Commission when this is all over and say, this is how much less access charge we paid, so this is what our reduction is going to be. They're requiring Nebraska's local telephone companies to be regulated with how much they can charge, which limits their revenue. Then it says how much they can earn because it limits it at 12%. Okay, but as far as requirements on them, there's no requirement on a long distance company's rate of return. There's no requirement that says, okay, long distance company, tell the Public Service Commission exactly how much was saved. They don't have to show that. Now, under the Public Service Commission plan that was introduced about 2 weeks ago, long distance companies do have to show, their rates have to reflect that reduction. But under 414, there's no requirement for that.
Long distance companies under Initiative 414 do have to file tariffs that show what their costs are. And,
it's not in there.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
And the public service plan that Phil is talking about is interesting because the Nebraska Telephone Association, which is opposing our initiative, knows full well that the Public Service Commission does not currently have the authority to implement the plan that they're proposing. The plan that the PSC has introduced, oddly enough, mirrors Initiative 414. It takes the same restrictions that our initiative proposes, and it incorporates it into their overall plan, which differs in that it also deals with a number of other telecommunications issues that are on the table. But the key problem with that Public Service Commission plan is that they propose to apply it to every telephone company in the state, not just the 3 largest companies, but to the small independent phone companies. And as I mentioned earlier, that state law prohibits them from regulating the rates of those companies. Their plan will be challenged in court and they will lose.
And we obviously disagree. Part of the problem here, when you look at the whole picture with access charges and long distance charges and local charges, your basic monthly phone bill, when you look at the revenues that local telephone companies get, you have to look at them in total. You can't just say they're overcharging over here and they're overcharging over here, undercharging over here, because a local company provides a number of services. They have a number of sources of revenue. It's kind of like walking into a car dealership and say, what's the price of this car? Well, the total price of the car is $15,000, and say, well, how much am I paying for that steering wheel, or how much am I paying for these tires? Well, it all kind of goes into the total cost of the local companies providing all the services that they provide. And so if you take $65 million, if you reduce access charges, okay, your local phone bill is going to have to go up because they're going to have to replace the revenue. You can't just rip $65 million out of an industry and say, well, you won't miss it. You really won't. And I guess part of the other thing, going back to something you said, if I don't know what AT&T is charging for margin on long distance calls now, but if you're going to say that access charges are 7 cents and AT&T is charging more than 2 cents a minute for their calls, their profit is 10 cents in some places. So I don't know, I mean, if they only need 2 cents a minute, why don't they cut it to 2 cents a minute now, just above the access charge you're paying? I mean, part of the problem here is that the numbers, there's a lot of numbers thrown out, and the numbers in Initiative 414 don't add up. The 15.7 cents is some kind of an average which nobody can find. The 2 cents comes out of a plan that AT&T, it's a forward-looking economic cost model.
Oh, one of those probably academician types?
Yep, exactly. Which AT&T likes to use because it sets the actual cost of an access charge really low, which benefits them. But the head of the Federal Communications Commission has said that study is flawed and doesn't work. So the Public Service Commission is going to have to come up with its own model, with its own plan for Nebraska, and it can't use, even though Initiative 414 directs them to use a forward-looking economic cost model plan, which they say is 2 cents. They can't use that plan because it doesn't work.
Well, they can use it. In fact, the Public Service Commission plan proposes using 2 different models, one for rural areas and one for urban areas, and one of them is the forward-looking model.
I seriously thought about not even coming here today because they can do this show by themselves. But just let me interject a little bit here, just for the heck of it.
Sure.
My confusion or where I'm torn is I want lower phone bills. I mean, I want lower any bill. Okay, I'm a human being, right?
Yep.
But I do have some kind of feeling for greater Nebraska in terms of its unique economic situation, in terms of its population and the cost of providing services. And yet, on the other hand, I feel like Tevye from Fiddler on the Roof, on the other hand, I know that some of them are paying much lower basic phone service than I am.
Yes.
And that's one of the flaws in the opposition's argument. They say that we need to pay excessively high access charges in order to keep our basic monthly rates low. But Nebraska is the 5th most rural state in the country. There are other states that are more rural than Nebraska that are paying less in access charges and lower basic monthly phone rates. Every one of our surrounding neighbors, South Dakota, Wyoming, Kansas, Iowa, some of whom are served by the same phone companies that we're trying to regulate here, are paying less in access charges and lower basic monthly phone rates. So if US West is able to provide lower access rates and lower basic monthly rates for its customers in Iowa, why can't it do it for its customers in Nebraska? And we're not talking about ripping $65 million out of the phone companies in rural Nebraska that are considered high-cost areas. First of all, there's a universal service fund that they're going to be able to withdraw money off of if they need subsidies. Second of all, these small phone companies, again, are not impacted by this legislation. We're talking about US West, Alliant, and GTE, multinational corporations that US West, as an example, over the past 3 years has spent $500 million in foreign investments. The top 5 telephone company executives in Nebraska made $15 million among themselves in 1997 alone.
That's not true.
Yes, it is.
Not in Nebraska, it's not.
Yes, it is.
No, check your facts. That's absolutely not true.
Probably because the US West exec isn't from Nebraska.
Well,
You just said in Nebraska, and we're talking about Nebraska.
I'm talking about the phone companies in Nebraska. US West, Alliant, and GTE. And their top 5 execs made $15 million in salaries and bonuses in 1997 alone.
well, I thought like US West top exec was in Colorado.
Well, yeah, their top executives in Colorado, Alliance is in Lincoln.
And that's the problem. We refer to them as local phone companies, but they're not really any more local than AT&T is. They just provide local phone
Well,
service.
this just points out to me, and I'll admit I'm probably an average American who reads about high exec salaries and golden parachutes and gets a little weird, but you know, then we should do that for all companies. I mean, we should
Well, sure, you can
get
say-
on all of them. But the point is that I'm having a real hard time, you know, because as I said, I want rural Nebraska to have the internet. I mean, we may have to cut tax if we continue concerned about our property taxes, you know, and if the farm economy goes down. I mean, I am concerned about the rest of my state. But on the other hand, I mean, should they be paying
Those
lower
companies
phone
won't
bills?
lose money.
Those
You know, to get to their house than I do.
And actually, and that's legitimate concern, and that's why if you go by the Public Service Commission's plan, okay, it encompasses every phone company. It's the right way to go. First of all, it doesn't just address 3 companies, it addresses the entire telecommunications industry in the state. It's a complete package. It gives those small companies 4 years to phase in a program whereby they can lower their access charges, they can bring their local cost or their local charge for local basic service up to a competitive level where competition can come in and compete. I mean, it requires them to do that. And it also allows time to set up a universal service fund so we can figure out how much money we are going to need to replace the lost revenue that those companies will lose. I mean, it's a good plan. The timing is right for it. Initiative 414 screws it up because it requires a cut in access charge before a universal service plan is even in place. It also does not affect the smallest companies, which have the highest access charges in the state. And 414 requires the use of a forward-looking economic model that in their advertising is a false number that's not going to be used anyway by the Public Service Commission. So, you know, to say it's 2 cents is just bogus. It's just simply wrong. It's going to be closer to in the neighborhood of 4.5 to 5, which is not that drastic of a cut from 7.5 when you're talking about, you know, 15.7 cents.
Commissioner Johnson of the Public Service Commission, who is responsible for establishing the Universal Service Fund and administering this, has said that Initiative 414 does not hinder the establishment of the Universal Service Fund. In fact, in July of '97, the Public Service Commission's task force said that they needed to know how low access rates were going to be reduced before they could establish the Universal Service Fund. So if you want a Universal Service Fund, you have to have reduced access charges.
What is this Universal Service Fund?
That is
I mean,
the
would we have to
subsidy.
pay
That's
a little
the pool
extra?
of money.
for instance, on your phone bill, there's a $3.50 charge called a federal subscriber line charge. Everybody who has a phone pays $3.50 per line for it. I think if you have 2 lines, it might be a little bit more. And then, but that money goes into a fund, and that's what subsidizes your state-to-state calls. That's why it costs more to call from Omaha to O'Neill than it costs to call from Omaha to Honolulu, to use their ad as an example. There's already a subsidy to subsidize those calls that the federal government has put into place. So what we're talking about in Nebraska is doing something similar, where there's a flat rate that people will pay, or it might be some kind of a percentage of their long distance bill. The Public Service Commission hasn't figured out exactly how to fund it yet, but that's part of the problem. As early as April of next year, we could have cuts in access charges where companies start losing revenue with no replacement revenue, with no universal service fund in place.
Although Commissioner Landis of the Public Service Commission said that they're going to be prepared to start making, taking contributions into the Universal Service Fund March of April of next year anyway, so the timing is consistent.
Okay, we only have a couple of minutes. Quickly from both sides, the net effect of putting this into initiative law, why you think that's good or bad?
Well, obviously, I think it's good because the Public Service Commission has been allegedly dealing with this issue for 10 years and has not moved forward. It wasn't until Initiative 414 was placed on the ballot that the Public Service Commission even put forth its first original, or its first proposed order on dealing with the Universal Service Fund, which they've said for years that they needed to do. Our Public Service Commission wasn't doing anything. Our legislature is not prepared to do anything. If the people don't act, we're at the mercy of the phone companies.
The Public Service Commission didn't start looking at this issue till 2 years ago, because the Federal Communications Act of 1996 directed states to lower access charges and establish universal service funds, and to increase the cost of local service to bring in competition. Okay, there's a federal component, meaning federal dollars that will be coming in to states' universal service funds, but the feds have not figured out how to do that yet, or how much money's coming in. Their target date has been moved back 6 more months now, and our Public Service Commission was going to wait until we knew how much money was coming from the feds before they started setting up a system in Nebraska. But the bottom line is, AT&T filed a complaint under the wrong statute before our Public Service Commission to require the Public Service Commission to lower access charges.
We'll have less than a minute. AT&T has tried to do this in other states, or has that worked? Has it passed?
They attempted to do a similar initiative in Arkansas, but the laws in Arkansas are very convoluted, not at all as consumer friendly as Nebraska's laws. Our Public Service Commission is at a point in the development of the telecommunications process that if it's going to work in the country, it's going to work in Nebraska. So it makes sense to start here.
So you're starting here.
Nebraska voters basically, and telephone customers, are AT&T's lab rats. They're trying to do this in other states. It's part of their marketing plan, because they want to cut their cost of doing business by lowering access charges, and the money's going to go in their pocket. Nebraskans aren't going to see a savings.
Well, we're running out of time. I don't know if we're running out of money, but time goes. Joanne Robinson with Vote Yes for Lower Phone Bills, and Phil Young with Nebraskans to Protect Our Phone Service. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Carol.
It's Initiative 414. Make sure you vote. We'll be back with more next week.
Thank you.
Consider This with Carol Schrader is made possible with support from Allegiant Health,